So that was a bit of a sidetrack, but I think an important one. Following along with the tactics that we're seeing, I just wanted to read a few more, again from the Intercept story about how they're spinning this story on bees. So dominating the web. This is a big thing. Now think about it. When we search on Google for a certain term, we tend to think what's coming up is what's rising to the top of collective knowledge. But not always, because companies are putting a tremendous amount of effort into figuring out how to game the Google search. So in this case with the bees, they compile a list of terms to shape the online search results. Neonics, pollinators. They hired a communications firm to shift how pesticides are portrayed in search results. And they bought online ads depicting pesticide critics as deranged conspiracy theorists. So that's a huge tactic. Anyone who's really gone up against the pesticide industry has felt that in the form of online trolls or whatever, people watching talks like this to report back. I'll talk more about that later. But also they were funding helpful legislators. There was a Republican in Georgia who convened a hearing on the pollinator crisis that was dominated by the pesticide industry. Rep. Austin Scott, he got $3,500. And then he gave a talking to one of the USDA scientists who appeared at the panel and said that the pesticides are maybe a problem. He got a talk about going off script. And then that scientist was later demoted. So, making sure that researchers who go off script are kind of sidelined is unfortunately something that's happened in many of our US agencies, which are now, at this point in 2020, there was a story in the New York Times recently about how most of the top positions at all of the environmental and health agencies in the US are run by coal, oil, and pesticide lobbyists. Just straight up hand it to the lobbyists. Now that's particularly noticeable now, but also it's been going on for decades. So it's not just a new problem. And then they fund beekeeper groups, conferences, bee summits where the message is heavily controlled, et cetera, et cetera. So I point all this out to just give you an idea to think about the many different ways that information comes at us in ways that we don't necessarily think of as being controlled by companies. At one of these bee summits, for example, that was reported in this Intercept story, it was convened by a group called the Keystone Science Center, and I had a friend that worked there for many years. It presents itself as a neutral group that convenes multi-stakeholder meetings where industry and communities can get together and hash through problems. Now that's a great value to stand for. I do think we need to get together in rooms and hash through values and ideas and ways we might go about solving problems, because it really is going to take all of us, people inside and outside these companies. But at this summit, it was totally controlled, heavily managed with the messaging, lots of scientists, varroa mites, not the pesticides. Beekeepers are doing it wrong, not the pesticides. They had beekeepers at this meeting, but they actually split them up. So they were just one at a table filled with lobbyists and, lawn care, chemical salesmen, and they talked about a policy that was before the US government, and then they made a survey of the meeting and presented it to legislators as, look, we did this multi-stakeholder meeting, and all these researchers and beekeepers agreed they're not worried about pesticides. So we wanted to, this is the bottom line. This quote by Garry Kasparov, I think, says it all about what's going on in these times in our lives. The point of modern propaganda isn't only to misinform or push an agenda, it's to exhaust your critical thinking, to annihilate truth. It's very exhausting to keep truth-telling, to keep saying concerns when you get attacked by trolls on Twitter, for example, or surrounded in a meeting by lobbyists when you're trying to raise concerns about what's going on with your beehives. A lot of people give up People feel shamed, their community doesn't agree with them, they stop talking. That's what the companies want, but that's what we can't do. So my group found out the hard way. Well, we found out what happens when you go up against these companies and start looking at where they don't want you to look. I mentioned we did all those public records requests looking at academia, universities, public institutions. Because they're public, you can request records, emails, from professors who were very active in the GMO labeling fight. They swore they were independent. We thought, let's see if we can investigate that, and we found out they were not so independent. We found people getting paid. We found a sophisticated, very coordinated network between companies and academics to figure out together how they can say their talking points. We need GMOs to feed the world. Pesticides are not a problem. How they could take on critics. They named names of people they would try to discredit, some of them speaking here. And then they would go after them in many ways, showing up at conferences, taking them on online, commenting all over news articles, calling editors. If a reporter quoted any of us, if a media outlet carried any of our stories, they would hear from probably not just one people, probably several of these people who again seemed disconnected, the professor, the concerned citizen, the company spokesman, calling people. I mean, I've heard stories of calling editors over and over and over again all weekend. The people, again, just give up. Now, I find this actually all very helpful because what it shows is they are putting an incredible amount of effort and energy into propping up a false story. And they actually have to do that. They can't go forward with this business model without a massive propaganda effort. And any attempts to shine transparency on it, to put forth what's really going on, are met with great resistance. But I think the resistance is stronger. The people speaking out are stronger. The many, many who won't go away when they try to silence, when they try to shame. And my group was definitely one of those groups. So I'm gonna, and I have some stories later to tell you about how we just recently found Monsanto's plan to attack my group. It was 30 pages, it's only a fraction of what's there, but we got to see, here's how they actually rolled out the plan to discredit us.